If you have ever encountered the name Jesus of Nazareth, you undoubtedly know him as a profound and revolutionary teacher whose words have resonated through the corridors of history, shaping the lives and destinies of billions. His most iconic phrases, like, "Love your neighbor as yourself," or "Do to others what you would have them do to you," are not mere platitudes, they are the very bedrock of a transformative philosophy. These timeless pronouncements, among many others, are drawn from a singular, powerful collection of Jesus's teachings, famously known as the Sermon on the Mount. This magnificent discourse, spanning a mere 3 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, has nevertheless imprinted its ideas and imagery onto the very fabric of human consciousness. Consider the profound implications of, "You are the salt of the earth," or the piercing insight that, "You cannot serve both God and money." Who can forget the humbling call to take the plank out of your own eye before you try to remove the speck from your brother's? Within the Sermon on the Mount, we encounter not only these enduring truths, but also teachings that challenge us to our very core, pushing the boundaries of conventional wisdom. Imagine the radical call to turn the other cheek if someone strikes you, or the seemingly impossible command to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. These are not easy words to hear, much less to live by. And then, there are those teachings that, at first glance, appear utterly puzzling, perhaps even jarring, such as the stark metaphor, "If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off." Yet, to understand the Sermon on the Mount as a mere compilation of isolated sayings, no matter how profound, would be to miss its deeper, more glorious truth. This is not a random anthology of Jesus's wisdom. Rather, it is a masterfully organized composition, structured with breathtaking intentionality. It is a work of divine architecture, designed to be remembered, meditated upon, and internalized. Picture, if you will, a meticulously crafted piece of art, or a complex musical symphony, where every note, every brushstroke, serves a precise purpose within a grand design. The Sermon on the Mount is precisely like that. It unfolds in 3 primary sections, each leading naturally into the next, building momentum and depth. And within the heart of this central section, there are again 3 distinct movements. Even more astonishingly, each of those inner movements themselves branches out into 3 further segments. It's like a spiritual Russian nesting doll, where each layer reveals another, leading you deeper and deeper into the core message. This careful design is not accidental, it is a testament to the divine wisdom embedded within Jesus's teachings, making them not only memorable, but profoundly holistic and interconnected. At the very epicenter of this intricate, divinely inspired structure, at the center of the center, lies arguably the most renowned prayer ever uttered. The prayer Jesus taught his disciples, the one we commonly know as the Lord's Prayer. In its majestic opening, we hear, "Our Father in heaven, may your name be treated as holy, may your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." This pivotal petition, "May your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven," serves as the beating heart of the entire sermon. But what exactly does it mean for God's kingdom to come to earth? To truly grasp the revolutionary implications of this prayer, we must first transport ourselves back in time, immersing ourselves in the world and worldview of Jesus himself. Jesus was, at his core, a Jew. He grew up steeped in the rich traditions and sacred narratives of the Hebrew Bible, the scriptures of Israel. These ancient texts told an epic story, the story of God and all humanity, beginning with God's perfect creation of a beautifully ordered world. In this pristine beginning, God appointed humanity, male and female, to rule alongside him, serving as his co-regents, stewards of his magnificent creation. When humans govern with God's wisdom, when they reflect his divine love, when justice and peace reign supreme, and when there is abundant provision for all, that, according to the ancient vision, is God's kingdom. That is his will being perfectly enacted here on earth, mirroring the perfect harmony of heaven. However, the Hebrew scriptures also painfully chronicled humanity's tragic rebellion. Humans foolishly chose to assert their own wisdom, to build their own kingdoms, often at the expense of others, leading to disorder, injustice, and suffering. Yet, in his boundless grace, God did not abandon his creation. He chose one family, the descendants of Abraham, known as the Israelites. Through them, he initiated a new chapter in his redemptive plan, offering them his divine wisdom, a wisdom encapsulated in what they called the Torah. In Hebrew, Torah simply means the teaching, and it encompassed not just laws, but a way of life, a path to true human flourishing. Beginning with Moses on Mount Sinai, God entered into a sacred covenant with this chosen people. But why choose only one family? The purpose was not exclusivity but mission. The ultimate goal was for the Israelites to be utterly transformed by God's wisdom, to embody his kingdom principles so perfectly that they could represent God's reign before all the nations of the earth, drawing all humanity back into his redemptive embrace. They were to be a light to the Gentiles, a living testimony to the beauty and justice of God's kingdom. Yet, by Jesus' day, the glorious vision of God's kingdom manifesting on earth through Israel seemed a distant, unattainable dream. In fact, the very opposite was true. Israel was not ruling, it was ruled. It was under the oppressive heel of the Roman Empire, a brutal imperial power that controlled their land, their economy, and much of their daily lives. So, the urgent question that burned in the hearts of many Israelites was, what happened? Why isn't God's kingdom coming? Why isn't his will being done on earth as it is in heaven, right here, right now, in our land? The spiritual and political landscape of Israel was fractured, with various groups offering different answers and different strategies for the coming of God's kingdom. Many religious leaders, like the meticulous scribes and the zealous Pharisees, believed that God's kingdom had not yet arrived because Israel, as a nation, had not been faithful enough to the Torah. Their solution was stricter adherence, greater purity, and an intensified commitment to the Mosaic law, believing that their collective righteousness would compel God to act and establish his kingdom. They envisioned a kingdom ushered in through spiritual obedience and national purity. Other prominent leaders, such as the aristocratic Sadducees, saw a different path. They were deeply entrenched in the temple cult and the political establishment, and they believed it would be most pragmatic, and indeed most beneficial for Israel, to find a way to cooperate with Rome. They became the shrewd power brokers of Jesus' day, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman occupation, believing that stability and survival lay in compromise and strategic alliances. Their vision of the kingdom was intertwined with maintaining the status quo. Even if it meant accommodating a pagan power, then there were those who could not tolerate foreign domination for a moment longer. The Zealots, for instance, were fiercely nationalistic freedom fighters who believed that God's kingdom would come through armed rebellion. They often fled to the desolate hills, forming guerrilla bands ready to shed blood to forcibly liberate Israel from Roman rule, convinced that a violent uprising was the divinely appointed path to freedom and the establishment of God's reign. And still others, like the Essenes, chose a path of radical withdrawal. They retreated to the desert, forming isolated communities, convinced that Israel had become too corrupt, too compromised, for God to work through them directly. They sought spiritual purity and separation, waiting patiently for God to intervene with a powerful, cataclysmic act that would sweep away the unrighteous and usher in a new, pure Israel, chosen by God to begin His kingdom anew. But if you were to walk through the dusty hill country of Israel, as Jesus frequently did, you would encounter not primarily these powerful leaders or radical revolutionaries, but rather the vast majority of ordinary people. These were men and women simply trying to eke out a living, figuring out their lives as best they could under crushing circumstances. Most were barely hanging on, living on the precipice of desperation. The land was rife with poverty, disease, and despair. Many had lost their ancestral lands to the greedy Roman occupiers, or to the wealthy elite who collaborated with them, leaving them as landless tenants or day laborers. They struggled endlessly to pay the heavy, oppressive taxes demanded by Rome, taxes that often amounted to a significant portion of their meager income. They were, in a word, powerless. They felt forgotten, overlooked, and utterly hopeless. Their cries often went unheard, their suffering unseen by those in power. It was precisely to these people, the marginalized, the dispossessed, the sick, the ostracized, the downtrodden, that Jesus of Nazareth came. He did not seek out the halls of power, nor did He align Himself with the religious or political factions of His day. Instead, He walked among the suffering, healing their infirmities, and, most profoundly, announcing a radical, counter-cultural truth: God's kingdom was arriving, right here, right now, in their midst. People from every corner, from Capernaum to Galilee, from Decapolis to Jerusalem, flocked to hear His astonishing teachings. They gathered in open fields, on hillsides, by the sea, captivated by His words, which carried an authority unlike any they had ever heard. And one day, as a vast multitude pressed in around Him, Jesus ascended a tall hill. He sat down, as was the custom of teachers, and His disciples gathered near Him. Looking out at the sea of eager, expectant faces, many of them tired, worn, and desperate for a glimpse of hope, Jesus began to speak. He began by proclaiming a revolutionary truth. The arrival of God's kingdom was not a future event reserved for the powerful or the righteous. It was starting right there, right then, with them. The powerless, the weak, the nobodies. The ones whom society had dismissed, overlooked, and forgotten. Yes, Jesus declared, God's kingdom begins here. This is why the very first line, the foundational declaration, of the Sermon on the Mount is so utterly breathtaking, so wonderfully subversive. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Think about the profound implications of this opening blessing. In a world obsessed with power, wealth, status, and self-sufficiency, Jesus turns everything on its head. He asks, where can you truly go and see God's presence, His blessing, His kingdom breaking forth and springing to life? Is it among the rich and influential, those who boast of their accomplishments and their self-reliance? Is it among the religious elite, confident in their own righteousness? No, Jesus says, if you want to see the kingdom of God, if you want to experience the vibrant reality of His presence and blessing, do not look there. Instead, Jesus directs our gaze to the most unexpected places. Look where people are poor, not just materially, but spiritually. Look where they are humble, where they acknowledge their profound need, their emptiness, their brokenness. Look where they feel crushed by the weight of life's burdens, where they are defeated by their own failures, where they are utterly dependent on a grace beyond themselves. Look at the seemingly insignificant, the overlooked, the outcast. It is precisely with these individuals, the poor in spirit, those standing right there before him on that hill, those who have nothing to offer but their profound need, that God's kingdom is not merely arriving, but beginning. It is here, among the humble and the desperate, that the divine reign of God takes root and flourishes. This radical beginning of God's kingdom, with the poor in spirit, is the launching pad for all of Jesus' subsequent teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. It sets the stage for a complete reevaluation of what it means to live under God's reign, challenging every human assumption about power, status, and righteousness. This is not a kingdom built on might or human achievement, but on humility, dependence, and divine grace. The Sermon on the Mount, with its intentional and divinely inspired design, truly begins with these counter-intuitive pronouncements of blessing. Jesus systematically declares a series of beatitudes upon his listeners, revealing who the truly blessed are in God's eyes, and thus, who are the true inheritors and participants in his kingdom. These blessings are not conditional rewards for good behavior. They are declarations of a new reality, a new way of being in the world, rooted in a radical dependence on God. And it is those profound and transformative blessings that we are going to dive into next, unlocking their timeless wisdom and understanding how they continue to invite us into God's radical kingdom vision today.